Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Michael Brenner, who is the CEO of Marketing Insider Group and co-author of the best-selling book, The Content Formula. Michael is also recognized by Forbes as Forbes' top CMO influencer and social media marketer, and Dun & Bradstreet has also recognized him as a top B2B marketer. Michael has also been included on the list of the top 50 most influential content marketers in the country. And today, we are going to be talking about personalization in content marketing. Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing, David?
Doing excellent. I know we've kind of touched on this offline before on personalization, so I've been digging into it, and it's a very key thing as far as trying to break through the noise, I guess, even in content marketing. Just like any marketing, it gets noisy, but it's starting to get a little noisy in content marketing, so we got to kind of do our best to stay ahead of the game, and that's what we're here to do to help other people accomplish. So, first off, just first quickly explain what you mean by personalization in content marketing before we get into, all the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, sure. And I think we also talked about this on a previous podcast around sort of the future trends in content marketing, and this was one of the four.
Yes.
So I don't know if you want me to recap those four very quickly, but basically, yeah. So the four trends that I think are really important, and these aren't like futuristic 2020. I mean, I think that right now today the companies that are really moving beyond or moving up the maturity curve, if you will, in content marketing, they're starting to see and face a number of challenges, like you said, in breaking through the noise. And so the first trend I talked about was specialization, which is essentially brands trying to really truly define a space they can actually own. Second is visualization, essentially creating more visual kinds of content, which is a kind of a skill that not a lot of brands have really worked as hard on. The third was humanization, which is kind of telling real human stories that meet people at their emotional level and touch upon the pains and challenges that they have. And then the final one is personalization. And again, all of this, I think all of these trends are important because of, like you said, the need for brands to move from just creating content to actually taking that content marketing approach to deliver real business results. And personalization is so important because, to get to your question, what it essentially means, and kind of the easiest definition, is delivering the right piece of content to the right person at the right time. So that's kind of the highest level definition, and then I think we can dive in and get a little deeper on that.
Okay, cool. So I guess to clarify, as far as personalization, you said right person, right time. Does it have to do with appropriate content, the appropriate person, which is what you're saying, or does it have to do with also creating content for different needs of like different stages of the buying cycle? Does that come into play as well when we're talking with personalization?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably 3 or 4, maybe even 5, I think, best practice steps, if you will, to achieving personalization. One of those, and we can get into what I think the steps are, but one of those is certainly, to begin with, you have to have the content to deliver to the right person at the right time. So, yeah, I think that's a key component.
Okay, cool. Now, this could feel a little daunting because, I mean, it's just like, they're out, your potential clients and prospects out there are to know which stage they're in and to try to hit them at the right time. It can seem very daunting, in addition to trying to create personalized content for each and every person. If, you start to try to get into the weeds of it and try to take what you're reading or hearing today or reading elsewhere to, verbatim. So can you provide some clarity on how this can be accomplished in a reasonable scale and maybe have a strategy, actually move the needle for you? You kind of get what I'm asking. I mean, it could feel like really hard to do this. Like how can one try to accomplish this? Where do you start on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, I often talk about how there's a couple of secrets in content marketing. And, probably the first secret that I talk about is that content marketing doesn't have to be that overwhelming or that difficult or that expensive. It's just really about answering the questions that your buyers have at each stage of the journey that they're facing. And they're knowable things. And, there's tools that I use to help my clients understand what those questions are. You can use simple things like Google Trends and even just Google autofill to try to figure out, what are people actually searching for when they go online and they start their journey towards trying to find a solution to a problem. So content marketing overall doesn't have to be that hard. The second secret is that the return on investment to content marketing is evident for any brand that actually commits to finding it. And in every case where I've worked with companies, they're finding massive increases in return on investment with content marketing versus other or relative to other kinds of marketing approaches. So those are kind of my two secrets to try to help, your audience feel less overwhelmed by this thought of, okay, if I've created content that maps the buyer journey and I'm showing results, well, now I got to think about personalization. It's really just an extension of effective content marketing, which is know your audience, know what they're interested in, know what questions they ask at each stage of the buyer journey. Personalization really gets to how do you now deliver that in the most effective way.
Okay. Now, I've read something about, and you touched on it. It doesn't have to be super crazy expensive, but it sounds like it would be crazy expensive to try to produce all this different content for each individual person and all that. And I know that's not what we're saying, and that's why I'm trying to kind of dig into that to provide some clarity here, or have you provide some clarity here. And so I read something about developing like modular content could be a solution. Are you familiar with that, and can you speak on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think modular content is just, essentially once you identify the kinds of content your audience is interested in, you also need to think about the formats and the locations where they're most apt to consume it. And so by modularizing content, for example, you might answer a question like if you're a CRM software company, you might just simply start by answering the question, what is CRM? And you can modularize that into a simple infographic, into an image, into a blog post, into a video, 30-second explainer videos or something that I think a lot of companies are experimenting with. So yeah, I think basically it starts with the questions that your audience is asking. It then proceeds into how to use an organization, turn your expertise into answers for those questions. And then the third step is really how do you make sure you've got that content in the right modular format, so that you can then, and some people call that atomization, but basically then you can sort of reassemble those atoms into the right, component compounds, if we're going to follow that analogy, for the right person at the right time.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's a way that kind of just touch on what you mentioned earlier. I mean, that's a way where you can save cost and you can provide some ideas on different pieces of content. So one piece could turn into 5, 10, 15 different pieces, and that's a way that you can go about, shortage of money or ideas, and that can really help you out there. So, speaking on the when you should serve the right piece of content to the right person, how can this be accomplished? And I'd like for you to maybe talk about it for companies that have bigger data resources, and for companies that really don't have that data or have a way of achieving that just because they're smaller or getting started and they don't have tons of traffic to get a lot of analytics from.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about personalization, again, it starts with having let's say that library of modular assets. Again, so you've got, if you imagine your buyer's journey and you've created content for each stage and you've modularized it into different formats, so you have to have that as a baseline. But then I think personalization really lends itself to, from a when perspective, to all the time. And I'll start with one example. One of the easiest ways to implement personalization is just on your corporate website. And there's lots of different audiences that are going to land on your website, and potential employees, existing employees, potential investors, existing investors, partners, and then obviously existing customers and prospects. And so, companies, in many ways, where personalization started with, first, I think, a segmented audience-based approach on their website from a menu perspective, for marketers, for investors, for employees. Now there's, you can use simple kinds of technology to understand who's landing on your website and how can you serve up the right piece of content for them. And so that would be the easiest way, place to start. And then, obviously,
let's touch that. That's very interesting what you just said. Knowing who lands and serving the right piece of content. So can you explain that a little bit further, because that's very interesting to hear. So yeah, I mean, I think, what do you mean exactly, and how can that be done?
Yeah, so account-based marketing is a big topic in B2B marketing right now, and all account-based marketing really is is creating a customized experience for a specific company. And surrounding that company with all the content and expertise and assets that you have as an organization to try to get them to become a customer. And so account-based marketing, in a sense, is really just an evolved technology solution to what many companies have been using for gosh, I think I used it at a startup, 10 years ago, and it's reverse IP lookup. And so there are technology companies out there that use reverse IP lookup so that, when I land on your website, you will know that I'm coming from Marketing Insider Group and that I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and that the temperature here is 42 degrees. And so you don't need to have, you don't need to be a large company to utilize those kinds of resources. Like I said, I was a 30-person company with no budget utilizing that technology 10 years ago. So it's, I think it's pretty simple to implement so that you can actually know at the very least, the organization that someone is coming from, potentially their location and other aspects that you can then use to define what kind of company is this and how can I serve up a custom experience for them.
So what happens then? You're doing the IP reverse lookup, and we recognize that you're a marketer or coming from a specific company. Then does your website respond differently? Does it show something different than if I were to go there, or my mom or dad or whatever? I mean, would it be would the website look different, show something different?
Yeah, I mean, Adobe Test and Target is a great example of a company that's offering this kind of service where, and in fact, if you go to adobe.com, you're going to see a very different web experience than if your mom did. And the reason for that, now, obviously, they don't always know who you are and where you're coming from. If you're using an iPhone, or if you're using, I don't know, do internet cafes even exist anymore? I don't know. But the point is that when they do know who you are, you're getting a very specific experience that's targeted potentially to your role, to your industry, to your location. Utilizing, essentially iframe technology. I mean, Test and Target is essentially, like you said, modularized. You can modularize your web page so that every component that's served up when somebody lands is completely customized.
That's interesting. Now, does that come with big time developing coding need, intelligence, or can something like a WordPress site give you the option to? I mean, obviously, WordPress sites can be, have a heavy development in them, but is that needed, or are there, certain templates and stuff that you can utilize on the back end of a CMS without having crazy development knowledge to accomplish that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we used, at SAP, we used Adobe Test and Target. So that was on a WordPress platform. Obviously, Adobe's an enterprise CMS solution. And so utilizing WordPress and an almost zero amount of development resources. Essentially, we just had our developer create, like I said, a number of iframes so that, and those iframes would, for example, if somebody landed on our website from a healthcare company, the featured, piece of content, the kind of the hero image they might see, and linked to would be an article linked to a healthcare piece of content. Just as a very simple example, that required almost no coding whatsoever. So that's an enterprise solution. But again, there's reverse IP lookup solutions for just any size company and budget that you can use to implement very rapid kinds of personalization and customization for your corporate website.
And correct me if I'm wrong, like say you're B2C and you're not going to, it's not an account-based thing. I guess a good place to start would be if it's a man or a woman, I guess, to serve them, speak to them that way, or is that a decent place to start on a lower level, or what do you suggest if you're not going to, you're not like account-based and talking to a CFO or, CMO, or, you're talking to just to men or women, right?
Yeah.
Do you agree with that, or is that a good?
Well, just a really simple example, another personalization, and this is more for e-commerce, is a company called Modular, which is right up the road from me here in Philadelphia. When you land on your website, at least you used to, I don't know if it's still this way, but they just very simply tell you what the weather is in where you live, where you're coming from. So just simple things like that, just based on IP lookup, they can identify, okay, you're coming from a computer or a phone that's in this location. And one of the easiest things they could do to create a personalized experience is say, hey, it looks like it's sunny in Philadelphia today. So very, very simple approaches like that can just create that experience for the user that's personalized to them.
Yeah, and not just the experience. You're also already thinking, wow, this company's pretty sharp, right? So whatever else they must be selling must be pretty sharp as well, which is the whole idea behind content marketing, right? Is to become a thought leader, and then by default, or your products are better, just in the eyes. So that's that's cool. So just to touch on again, smaller business, smaller budget. What are some solutions you can point to that people can try to dig around and play with that won't break the bank? I know you mentioned the Adobe one for enterprise, but I guess just for starters, they'll need to do the reverse IP. Can you point us to some good companies to look into there?
Yeah, so I think, and I don't even know if they're still around, but the company I used when I was at the startup, 10 years ago, was a company called Lead Pages. And all they did was reverse IP lookup. So, they would give you a report and say, here's who landed on your website based on their IP information, what companies they were with. Sometimes they actually know the individual username or email address if they had a cookie, but that's a very simple, very cost-effective solution. There are a couple of companies that I recommend, and I'm not getting paid to say this, but there's companies that I have seen and experienced both as a consultant and almost as a customer, and those companies are OneSpot. OneSpot, really a thought leader in this whole personalization space. In fact, I'm partnering with them on some content initiatives. Again, making no money by referring them, so there's no real skin in it for me, except I think they're really thought leaders in this space. And what they do is they call it content sequencing, and just explain what they do. For example, they go out and they sort of programmatically buy banner ad space, and then they work with a client to try to identify what's the right piece of content along the buyer journey for their clients. And so, for example, when Dave Reimer shows up on, let's say, Forbes, and you're reading an article about CRM, they might have an article on what is CRM, just a very simple article presented in a banner ad. And then because they've cookied you, let's say you go and you land on the New York Times, they might serve up another ad that is the ultimate guide to understanding CRM solutions. And then, so sort of a deeper piece of content. And then, in the fifth or sixth sequence, they might offer you up, depending on where you are on the internet, they might offer you up an actual ad to buy or to consider OneSpot or to consider the CRM solution they're selling or whatever. All of that is done through systematic, programmatic ad buying. And they're showing 100x improvements in click-through rates with that kind of personalization. So again, it requires a user cookie. It requires having that content mapped across the buyer journey, but it's content sequencing, essentially following people around across the internet, but serving up different messages. So that's one. And there's a company called IDEO, IDIO. They're based in London. Actually, I was exposed to them when I was at SAP, and we didn't buy, but considered utilizing them. Very similar to what OneSpot is doing, and getting deeply involved into the whole account-based marketing and personalization space as well. There's another company that I love called Sailthrough. And so Sailthrough is a company that I found because I'm a subscriber to Business Insider's newsletter. And they've been using them for a couple of years. And what I found was that they essentially serve to me a different newsletter than they serve to everyone else based on my click-through patterns with the content that I consume on Business Insider's newsletter and website. And so the newsletter, I get a daily newsletter from them, and they serve up about 10 or 15 different articles, all of which are very specifically customized to me based on the things that I've clicked on before or shared before. And they utilize Sailthrough for that technology. So there's just a few. OneSpot, IDEO, and Sailthrough. Those are three, I think, technologies that just about any budget could handle.
Okay. Now, to circle back around to what you were saying earlier about the banner ads and serving different message, different piece of content, and the sequencing, and then and this is in regards to the buyer's journey and the stage of the different type of content, top of funnel, middle, towards the end. Is it basically just assuming that they're sequencing it like let's obviously we've all read different done or more of a lot of us probably have looked into different stages of the buying cycle. There are like 3 stages or 5 stages or 7 stages, but they're all saying the same things, but then you could slice them up. So you're going to be doing different pieces of content for that. Do they just sequence it just assuming, let's call it a 5 stages of the buying cycle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, without indicating on you doing this or that? They're just assuming, hey, let's just serve them in order. Is that the strategy there, or is it a lot more intricate than that?
I mean,
do you understand my question?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm not an expert in their technology. I just kind of generally know how it works. But I've worked with companies like Vonage, who's a customer of theirs, and Intel is a customer of theirs, and from what I gather, they are modularizing their content into let's call it buying stage buckets, but they're also using the click-through patterns and the engagement rates, even on the article you might be reading, to determine which banner ad to present. So, for example, let's say you're reading that article on Forbes, and they present a "What is CRM" article content ad, right, in the banner, in the digital display banner. If you don't click on that, they might serve you a different, version of that same kind of piece of content with a different piece of creative, or they might serve a different article that they've also mapped to the early stage if you didn't click on it. So they're constantly testing both not just content, stage, image, headline. They're testing all of those elements, and then trying to essentially optimize into let's call it the optimized ideal kind of mechanism to get you to engage with that interactive ad unit.
Gotcha. So it'd be like if you're stage 1 of the buying cycle, you don't click another stage 1, another stage 1, another stage 1, and then if you happen to finally click on one of those or read one of those or spend some time on one of those, then the next stage of the buying cycle type of content until you read, and then the next and the next. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, awesome. Now, and again, it makes sense. I get it. It's still, I do know kind of what goes into some of this stuff, and it's more than just jumping in right away and accomplishing it, but it is something that a lot of people can move forward with by just being given the idea that you're doing today, and we all appreciate that. But if you wanted to do something, would this count, and would this be a way for people to implement right away? Would be like a Facebook campaign where you can design a series of pieces of content to get delivered to the same person, and then sequence those as the same kind of thing, instead of banner ads, but you go through Facebook. Are you familiar with that at all? And would this be something that, people, smaller businesses can jump into right away? I mean, everybody can place Facebook ads, right? Obviously, knowing how to do this is a little bit next step, but you can figure it out, or you can call a marketing company and they can help you out with it. But would that be something that people can dip in? Would you suggest, like, yeah, it's a great starting point, or are we off base on that?
No, I mean, Facebook, and again, as a content marketer, my bias is always towards starting with your owned platforms before investing in, let's say, off-domain or unowned platforms like publisher sites. But, I mean, Facebook as a platform itself offers personalization. So, the things that you see in your newsfeed are totally personalized based on the things you've engaged with and the things that your friend circle has engaged with as well. So there's already personalization and trending topics and newsfeed algorithms that are already in place for Facebook. As an advertiser, they do offer personalization for their advertiser audience. And so, for example, they leverage, data brokers, I want to say like Experian and Datalogix, those kind of companies, to give advertisers options beyond just the targeting and filtering that you can select with a Facebook ad. And so you can get much more granular around building a profile from Facebook users. Now, whether they offer content sequencing in the way that like OneSpot does, I don't know. But I do know that they do offer that sort of user profile service where not only will you know, again, the things, the demographics that you've identified in your Facebook feed or your Facebook account, but then they also map that using data providers to build out a larger user profile.
Yeah, and I will say we do build out Facebook campaigns that are sequenced like that. The unofficial word, I guess, John Loomer, who you might be familiar with, big Facebook marketing guru that we learn from constantly. He calls them evergreen. I think he came up with that term, evergreen campaigns. So if anyone out there wants to Google John Loomer evergreen campaigns, that he talks about sequencing, putting all these in order. You're going to get this one and then this one and that one. But that's the tool and the methodology. Then you need to have strategy and learn from people like Michael here to think it through. Okay, now what are we going to say? What are we going to serve? Let's think this through. Let's put these in order. So the tools are out there, the methodology is out there to learn from how to do it, and then strategy learning from people like Michael is obviously super important. Now, what are some of the most common mistakes people made in personalization, and any advice on how to avoid them?
Well, I mean, I think there's a number of steps, and we didn't really get into steps. So I don't know if you want, I can walk through. I think the 4 main steps to personalization, and I think not doing one of the steps is essentially the biggest mistakes, and it really starts with, I think, building out user profiles, and I want to make sure I'm very clear that I'm not talking about personas, and the reason that I think I want to make that clear is that personas, can help as a baseline. But where personas often fall short is identifying the user interests, the things that people are interested in that don't necessarily relate to your product. And so it's, Google calls it an intent-based approach, right? Understand what your audience is interested in. That's the best way to find your audience. Knowing, the demographics, that you're targeting a 25 to 35-year-old, white female isn't going to help much in the content creation and personalization process if you don't know what those people are actually consuming and reading and interested in online. So it starts with, I think, building out user profiles that truly understand not just the demographics, but also the interests that they have, that your target audience has. So that's sort of stage 1, user profiles. And often what that looks like, it looks less like an individual target segmentation and much more like a group segmentation. So for example, some people call these interest profiles. So, people that love cats, right? So that's an interest profile, and it's not a demographic, right? So those are some of the segments that I think people that do personalization well build out those interest-based segmentation approaches. Now, the segments could also be based on location or role, or, company size, industry, all of those kinds of things, typical demographic stuff. But informing the content plan requires understanding those interest segments. So that's number 1. Number 2 is then having the content. The biggest mistake I see with companies in content marketing is they have too much late-stage content and not enough early-stage content. And you can even use very simple tools like Google Autofill to understand, or Google Trends, to simply understand the volume of your target audience interests in early stage versus late stage kinds of content. So you have to have content, you have to have it mapped across the buyer journey, and the biggest mistake companies make is not having enough early and middle stage content that really kind of almost intentionally avoids the product conversation for a little bit longer than most companies are comfortable with. So that's number 2.
And let me chime in on something that you've said in the past that has helped provide clarity for me. You mentioned, you're being great advice, but, vague in the sense that, more here, more there. The example, what you said is for every 1 piece of the final stage of content, you want 10 pieces of middle content, you want 100 pieces of early stage content. The early stage content is, answering questions, speaking to pain points and needs and being helpful and all of that. And the late stage content would be more of like a case study, product, like more of a sales, more about yourself. So what Michael has seen, and I've learned from him, is that a lot of people do focus because it's more comfortable to them on the end of that, about us, our company, how great we are, how great our products are, how we compare to others, our cost benefits, blah, 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 all that stuff. And I say blah, blah, blah. It's important, but people aren't going to get there, or at least not many as people are going to get there. And so that's where people or backload their content, I guess. And what Michael is saying and has been preaching forever is like, whoa, you need to go heavy on the top of the funnel, on the beginning, the awareness stuff. So, you know, the formula he gives is, you know, to put it, you know, 1 to 10 to 100. So every one piece of content you're writing about your products and services, you need 100 of the other stuff. So, and, you know, obviously it could be 1, you know, to 50 or whatever, but the point Michael makes is heavy up front. So anyways, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I tried to name it the Brenner principle, but it didn't really stick.
Why not?
But yeah, it's
good.
It's, you know, kind of like the Pareto principle of you know, the 80-20 rule, and it's, you know, you're right. Most companies have a pyramid, you know, where most of their content is in the late stage and very little of their content is in the early stage, but it should be inverted. It should be, like you said, for every one piece of product content, which I'm not saying, like you said, it's important. I'm not saying to stop creating that. What I'm saying is that the mix is off and off. And too many companies simply don't have enough early stage content to map to the number of people and the number of questions that buyers are asking early in the process. So you're right, 100 pieces of content for every one piece of product content, and then, you know, something like 10. And again, these numbers are just guides. You can use free tools online to figure out exactly what that number is for you. At SAP, we found in the big data category, the number was 30,000. There were 30,000 times more people searching for early stage, you know, what is big data and what does it really mean kinds of content than there were for every one person looking for, you know, actually purchasing a big data solution. So, you know, it really depends on the category that you're in, but I think 1 to 100 is a great place to start.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So, yeah, so that's number 2. The third thing, and this is, you know, this is kind of classic marketing, but what I think a lot of companies forget, and actually my co-author for the content formula just published an article on my site today about the importance of tone in personalization. And what I mean by that is it's not necessarily a unique point of view or why we're different or why we're the leading company and blah, blah, blah. It's more about what separates you from everyone else that people might be getting content from. And she used the Skim as a great example of, you know, if you look at headlines on the Skim newsletter versus on the same topic versus the New York Times, you immediately know that this is a headline from the Skim. And so creating content that has a unique sort of sense of tone and approach, and this is kind of part of that specialization and humanization trend that I talked about to begin with, but really understanding tone and copywriting and all that kind of stuff is important. So that's the third step, right? Do you have a tone that differentiates you from, you know, just everybody else in the marketplace? And then the fourth is delivery, and that's where we kind of got into the technologies and where. You know, what technology do you use and where do you then apply personalization? The answer really is you should apply it everywhere. You should do it on your website. You should do it on Facebook. You should do it in your newsletters, and you know, technology can support all of that. But again, we're talking about personalization as a trend in content marketing because simply because the companies that are utilizing it are seeing much higher engagement and conversion rates than companies that don't.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense. You know, I mean, the more personal, more human you can be, the more people will be drawn and attracted to you. I mean, marketing 101, right? Putting the right message in front of the right person, right? And it just, you know, as the world grows and as the internet grows, it can get harder, but at the same time, technology develops alongside of it and makes it easier. So that's why we're talking and learning from people like Michael so that we can stay ahead of it and always be ahead of our competition. Well, awesome. Do you have any parting thoughts or any other examples you'd like to share before we have to let you go here?
Well, I mean, you know, people are looking. I think examples are always a great way to highlight the importance and the process that companies need to go through to think about personalization. So I'll just read off a list of a couple of my favorite examples if we have time.
Oh, absolutely. I wanted you to give as many examples. You already gave a few, so I wasn't going to circle back around to that. But just as many examples as you can provide. That always helps me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that the number 1 or 2 examples that most people think of when they think of personalization is Amazon, right? So when I go to Amazon, they serve up a list of products that I might be interested in based on my user history, based on my viewing history, based on my purchase history. So Amazon recommendations, perfect example of a company building a profile around my purchase history and my viewing history and presenting recommendations to me. Great example of personalization. Another popular example is Netflix. When I go to Netflix, it says, oh, you've recently watched this. Do you want to continue watching? You might also like these titles because they're similar to stuff you've already watched. So, you know, again, very simple consumer kind of examples that people can, I think, relate to. One of my favorite examples is Spotify. And I'm actually not a Spotify user, but I've come across this example where it might say, oh, you are the #1 engaged fan of the Foo Fighters, and so they'll send an email that says, here's an email from Dave Grohl. And Dave Grohl say, hey, Mike, I really appreciate that you've been a great, fan of our music. And, this month you're one of our top engaged fans. You downloaded 7 of our songs and, you listen to them in your Uber taxi ride. And just a truly personalized message based on their, account history of knowing what Spotify users are doing by delivering an actual message from the artist, which, I don't know if they actually get the artist to write those messages, but I think it's a pretty cool approach to personalization. We talked about Business Insider, LinkedIn jobs. When you go to LinkedIn, it says, hey, you might be interested in these jobs because they're in your area or in your profession. Just another great example there. So again, Twitter does it with, you might want to follow people based on people you already follow. Facebook, obviously does it. So, again, there's a lot of great examples out there in the consumer space. I think I've already mentioned Intel, Vonage, Monetate as great examples on the B2B space. So, hopefully that's enough examples to get people, interested to go check them out and see what they're working on.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of just paints the picture. I mean, it's, impossible to speak to a million companies, but in general, though, you just give a general, in general, this is what people are doing. How can that apply for you? And right. Michael mentioned a ton of technologies out there that can help do this, and then it comes down to being creative and obviously setting up your structure, get your content, get your audit, or get your plan for what you will be writing about, go heavy up front, and then follow people through and deliver a personalized experience as you can, and there's various ways to go about it. So that's awesome, man. That's awesome. I'm going to make a note to re-listen to this with my team because I want to also get further, get better about all this because it is – I've been really looking forward to this podcast because I really wanted to dig in with this. So I think you've provided a lot of clarity and a lot of examples and greatly, greatly appreciate it. Michael, how can people continue to learn from you, buddy?
Yeah, sure. Marketinginsidergroup.com. I share daily insights from not just myself, but other folks in our industry, essentially covering focus on content marketing, but also, covering digital marketing in general, trends in our space, and, marketing automation and, social platforms and demand generation and B2B marketing. So, would love for your audience to come check it out there. You also find me on Twitter @BrennerMichael. I try to share not just my own insights, but insights from many others to really help, advance our profession. I think the marketing profession currently is under attack from the forces of digital transformation and these sort of promotion-centric, traditional marketers. I think that are starting to feel the pressure of showing results and delivering content that people actually want, and so that's the kind of insights and expertise I try to share for myself and others, and would love to engage with your audience on those platforms.
Well, you don't try, Michael. You do. And for the listeners out there, his spelling of his Twitter handle is @BrennerMichael. That's BrennerMichael. All right, Michael. Hey, appreciate it, and looking forward to the next one.
Thanks so much.